Chapter 3. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Porter could be tracked down to the back room of the Rook that dreary Monday evening, talking all things paranormal. While the candles were doing their best to mellow the gloom, they could not reduce the drama that was the guest speaker. An audience of, say, 30 was hanging on to Porter's every word, while the president of Perfectly Paranormal enjoyed the coup. An incident 15 years ago had prompted Neil Dalton to create the group, and now he was an expert on York's preternatural activity. 2 wives, a failed business, and 1 DUI later, and his belief was doggedly intact. Neil nodded approvingly as Porter spoke of prejudice as proof and practicalities. He was all too familiar with the pitfalls of paranormal research. Paranormal activity is not a modern notion. Pliny the Younger was writing about ghosts nearly 2,000 years ago, declared Porter, as 3 latecomers wandered in. She paused for them to find seats before continuing. The paranormal has always been polarising, with ancient believers and skeptics disputing Pliny's account. However, while some believe skepticism hinders paranormal research, I believe it's necessary to help focus our work. A man scoffed at the back. "You're entitled to your opinion," said Porter easily, when Neil glared at the member. "Anyone wishing to discredit my ability is only forcing me to substantiate what I see, and that's entirely reasonable. And on that note, I see empty glasses, which is a sign I've talked for long enough." Neil waited for drinks to be replenished before inviting questions. "Have you ever spoken to a spook on the phone?" a man mocked. His friends sniggered covertly. Neil was mortified. He didn't recognise them as members. Porter's "Yes, I was working for Anomaly at the time" silenced the mirth. The case involved a retired engineer who lived alone on London's South Bank. The Joker's grin melted under Porter's steady gaze. Mr. Neeson contacted Anomaly after receiving some unsettling calls. It all started when a woman phoned to tell him she was waiting for him behind a local bus stop. She hung up before he could ask her name. Mr. Neeson assumed it to be a prank call, but he still felt compelled to check. There was no one there. His phone was ringing when he returned to his flat. The caller was crying. She accused him of abandoning her before hanging up. Mr. Neeson was unnerved by the experience. He told his daughter, who had contacted the police. They said it was probably a nuisance caller, but when they checked the phone log there was no record of the calls. "And that's convenient," the Joker snorted into his pint. Mr. Neeson endured 6 months of calls before coming to Anomaly for help, Porter told him. "Silly old sod should have changed his number," the Joker continued. Neil stood up. "This is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "It's a free country, pal." Tension mounted. Some of the braver members just stared openly at the array of tattoos, while others wished themselves elsewhere. Porter was intrigued by a figure stretching from elbow to wrist. The mermaid appeared to be holding a bag of chips. "I really must insist," pressed Neil, his night unravelling. "Mr. Neeson wasn't as naive as you think, Mr. intervened Porter. "Evans," the Joker disclosed without thinking. The audience was in awe of David standing up to Goliath. "Well, Mr. Evans, Mr. Neeson changed his number 3 times, which didn't help. Having his phone disconnected didn't help either. It was still disconnected when I started my inquiry, yet I recorded 17 calls in 24 hours. The caller would hang up whenever I answered, but she always spoke to Mr. Neeson, begging him to come and meet her. Mr. Neeson's phone company confirmed his line was disconnected, and they couldn't explain how he was still getting calls." Porter waited for a retort, but none was forthcoming. The Joker's friends shifted awkwardly. One even edged away. Black eyes continued to intimidate. "Mr. Neeson took me to the place where the woman said she was waiting. The park behind the bus stop was closed and its playground vandalised." "Bloody councils. They're neither use nor ornament," muttered a member. Mr. Neeson's memories of the park had transported Porter beyond the park's humiliation to its halcyon days. He had pointed out the pond, long dry, and a children's maze, long gone to seed. Flower beds, once awash with colour, now relied on rubbish to disturb the monotony. While Porter was surveying the stagnation, a tiny figure had flitted from behind a tree and skipped across the park towards the back of the bus shelter. Those waiting for the number 53 remained oblivious to the apparition beyond the railings. Porter's curiosity had got the better of her. She stunned Mr. Neeson by scaling the gate and was nearly upon the spectre when someone had shouted at her to get out. The apparition took fright and evaporated. About to deliver the caller some choice words of her own, Porter had been distracted by something white resting in a bush. It was a feather. Porter could smell almonds when she salvaged the offering, an aroma she associated with the youthful dead. Neil asked her to describe the revenant. Porter considered the question before settling on a narrow, pearly mist with no obvious definition. Was it transparent? Asked a member. On that occasion, replied Porter. I believe a spirit's depth and definition are dependent on its skill to harness its surrounding energy. The more energy it absorbs, the stronger it is. Don't cite me on that, though. It's only a theory, she advised the note-takers. Could you tell its gender? Asked a woman, one of a handful attending the event. Not at that point, answered Porter. Then how can you be sure it was even a ghost? She continued. I wasn't sure. It could have been an hallucination, pollution, or delirium from a dehydration, said Porter, willing to debunk what she had witnessed that day. You don't believe that, though, a voice asserted quietly. Scanning the gloom, Porter settled on a man on the course to middle age. His ebony hair was flecked with white. I didn't catch your name, she said. I didn't pitch it, Blue Eyes teased. Call me Ted. How do you know what I believe? Responded Porter, swallowing her disdain. Ted bowed out with a lazy smile. Did Mr. Neeson see her? Asked Neil. No, but I saw her again on the following day, and she was more pronounced. It was a young girl wearing a beret. Mr. Neeson became distressed when I described her and told me to stop investigating. But Mr. Neeson's reaction had prompted Porter to keep digging, and she uncovered articles about the park at the local library. A newspaper from the 1940s had written about the discovery of a girl's body by the swings. The police assumed she had fallen off while playing, and that it was a tragic accident. The swings were behind the bus shelter at the time, but had been moved soon afterwards. Mr. Neeson had refused to speak to Porter when she contacted him about her findings. She was forced to write to him instead. He turned up at my office a few days later and confessed to killing the girl. A stunned air filled the room. Even the Joker was silent. Mr. Neeson said they were being silly on the swings when the girl lost her grip. She fell and hit her head. He tried to rouse her, but when he realised she wasn't breathing, he ran away. He had been too frightened to tell the truth. I encouraged him to go to the police. He was reluctant at first, but he eventually found the courage. They accepted it was an accident. Neil wanted to know what had caused the girl to start haunting Mr. Neeson after so many years. Because the council closed the park, suggested Ted. Members glanced his way before looking to Porter. Porter nodded. The call started soon after the park's closure. The girl was upset about being left alone. It sounds like an intelligent haunting, said Neil. Sounds like a lazy haunting, a member scorned the ghost's method of communication. What was the world coming to when even the dead were choosing to haunt remotely? Sounds like a load of old rubbish, the Joker found his voice again. And that's why good working practices are essential if we are ever to be taken seriously, said Porter good-naturedly. We're not just a bunch of anoraks pandering to our imaginations, protested Neil. What's wrong with anoraks? Asked a man on the second row. His friend shrugged, nonplussed. Neil rounded off the evening by inviting Porter to stay for a drink. Wine, she mouthed when he surrendered her to the will of his members. Fortunately, Sue's arrival proved timely. She rescued Porter and ushered her into a side room. Sorry I'm so late. Once Professor Rawlinson gets started on his stone tape theory, there's no stopping him. The man can talk for England. Porter noted Sue's lack of discretion. Neil reappeared with drinks and a woman. The latter he introduced as my wife Claire. Traffic was a nightmare, said Claire, downing her wine. I need another. Make it a large one, she waved a glass at her husband. Scrap that. Make it a bottle. Neil seemed reluctant to leave her alone with his guests. Today would be nice, barked Claire, forcing him to comply. Sue frowned. There was something familiar about the woman. Have we met before? Very likely. I get about. Thanks. Claire snatched the bottle and replenished her glass. Claire's a solicitor, revealed Neil, accustomed to filling in the gaps. Porter choked on her drink. Wrong hole, she mumbled, avoiding Neil's gaze. You're Claire Dalton of Dalton's Solicitors, Sue expressed relief at making the connection. I knew I recognised you. It's my uncle's practice, reported Neil. Was, Claire snapped. The old toad has been dead for years. You'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference, though. He was a right stiff. Neil cringed when the landlord glanced over. Dalton's handled my brother's divorce, said Sue, wondering if Claire had been involved in his case. Did we get him a good deal? Asked Claire, wondering the same thing. Got to keep his Harley, which made him happy, so he recalled her brother's priorities. At least he knew where it was at night. Claire swayed against the table. That's more than can be said for Neil. Claire, the man warned. Sue coughed awkwardly and tried to catch Porter's eye. It was time to go. Porter was too busy enjoying the show to notice. God, Neil, you're so uptight. No wonder your other wives left. Other wives? Encouraged Porter. Neil sighed. Haven't you heard? I thought every man and his dog knew about my husband's pitiful love life. We should be making a move, insisted Sue. Neil nodded gratefully. Yes, that's probably a good... But we're just getting started, objected Claire. She'd been working on a difficult case all day and needed to wind down. And I haven't finished my drink, agreed Porter. Neil swallowed another sigh. Claire raised her bottle to Porter. I would offer you a drink, only I don't like to share. Now what was I talking about? Neil and his love life, prompted Porter. Yes, thank you, janitor. It's Porter, said Neil, his colour rising. If you say so. At any rate, you can see why the other two left, not that they left empty-handed. The first wife took most of it, the second what was left. Sorry, by the way, she sniggered at her husband. You represented them, asked Porter, making her drink last. Yes, I screwed him, and then I screwed him. You've had enough, Neil tried to wrestle the glass from his wife. Claire put up a good fight. I'll tell you when I've had enough. You spilt my wine, you stupid arse. Claire downed what was left and staggered to the bar. Neil waited until she was out of earshot before apologising. She has a stressful job, he offered meekly. Sue made sympathetic noises while Porter observed the woman at the bar. The landlord was refusing to serve her. Claire glared and pointed at the wine rack. The landlord shook his head. She argued, but the landlord refused to budge. Claire stumbling against the bar did little to help her case. The landlord turned his back and served another customer. Porter drew Neil's attention to the figure slumped against the wall. The man relaxed on seeing his wife rendered silent. I'll collect her on the way out. They stayed until last orders. Leaving Neil to brave his wife, they suffered the northern drizzle, a taster for Porter of what was to come.